Okay, here we go. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for today's A Month of Service presentation of Explanation of the Texas Court System. My name is Nia Murray. I'm Programs Coordinator with Neighborhood Recovery Community Development Corporation, and we are one of the partners in the A Month of Service collaboration. Also included in joining us today is the City of Houston's Department of Neighborhoods, Ms. Myra Hippolyte, and the Houston Bar Association. And here on behalf of the Bar Association is Mr. Mark Waite with DLA Piper, who's going to be facilitating our workshop for today and giving our presentation. Included also in our partnership is Lone Star Legal Aid, the Earl Carl Institute, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, Harris County Appraisal District, and Harris County Tax Assessor Collector's Office. And together we all make up A Month of Service partnership. And basically what A Month of Service is, for those that don't know, it is a collaboration of these 8 different organizations that get together on a monthly basis and offer a month-long set of workshops relative to asset building, community empowerment, asset protection, and maintaining of generational wealth. So we know that there are a lot of communities that throughout Harris County and even throughout the state that don't have access or don't know about certain resources or information, that have questions, don't know where to go, don't know how to get started, that kind of thing. So since we all pretty much service the same community, we all have the same mission and same goals in mind. So we decide what better way than to create a larger impact than all of us to collaborate and come together and service all the same communities at one time. So we used to be able to go out into the community and do these presentations on a monthly basis. But of course, you know, due to COVID, we've had to adjust and adapt and go to the virtual platform. Well, in doing that, we've also started to extend our reach and create you know, even more of a following and have more people join us from all over the state. So information that is presented here today, it's for the entire state of Texas. It's not just for the city of Houston or for Harris County. And Mark will get into more detail about that. But I'll go into some detail about other workshops that we've got coming up. We thank you guys for joining us this afternoon and for continuing to come back and to support A Month of Service. But we are going to move on into our presentation. Oh, before, I got to give the little disclaimer. The information that we present on the legal workshops are for educational purposes only. It is not legal advice. However, if you do find yourself in need of any civil legal matter, we do encourage you to reach out to our legal service partners like Lone Star Legal Aid, Earl Carl Institute, Houston Volunteer Lawyers, and Houston Bar Association for more assistance. So in addition to that, we ask that you to be as interactive as you'd like to be. However, please keep in mind that we are broadcasting live on our social media platform. Follow us on Amos Houston TX. And we want to, you know, protect your privacy as much as we possibly can. So we ask that the questions that you do ask of the presenter, that you keep them to be as general as you possibly can to make sure that your personal detail information does not get out there for everybody in the public to actually have access to or to hear. So either feel free to type your question into the chat and we'll read them at the end, or you can feel free to unmute yourself. Or if you're following us on Facebook, type your questions into the comments and then we will read your questions aloud for everybody. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce one of our partners and we'll go ahead and get started. So Ms. Myra.
Thank you, Ms. Nia. Thank you, Mr. Mark. Good afternoon. My name is Myra Hippolyte and I work with the City of Houston Department of Neighborhoods under the direction of Director Takasha Francis. And on behalf of Mayor Sylvester Turner and Director Takasha Francis, we want to welcome you to the Month of Service program. The Month of Service program is all about giving back free information to the Houston, Harris County, state of Texas community. We want to make sure that each community knows that whatever stressor you're going through in your life, you know, you're not alone. We, the City of Houston and the other partners, are partnering right next to you, and we're walking right next to you. Sorry about that. We're walking right next to you and know that you're not alone. During many stressors in our lives, you know, there's many times we just have a freak out, because that's what I do. I'm like, oh my God, what is the process? What do I need to do now? And, you know, we also need to first calm down and then go through the process that the month of service partners give you. What is step 1, 2, 3, and let's go. You know, we went through Hurricane Harvey, we went through Winter Storm Uri. Many times we go through different situations in our lives and we don't have the answers. So that's what we're here for. Thanks, guys. You have a great day and enjoy this wonderful presentation. Thanks.
Okay, all right. And our presenter, Mr. Mark Wade with DLP Piper, is going to be providing you guys with information about the Texas court system. We know that many of us, including Myra and myself, do not have all the answers. We don't know how things work. We don't know how the legal court system works. We know that many people have questions. You know, again, we're not the professionals, so we want to provide the professionals for you guys to provide this information. So Mark, you can go ahead and take it away, introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. This is obviously a great organization, as well as all the organizations that make it up. I'm here through the Houston Bar Association. So I have been a lawyer since 1994. I grew up in Houston, went to Bel Air High School, and graduated from Texas A&M. Up in College Station, and then came back home to University of Houston Law Center. So we're going to talk about the courts, but do a little bit of background first. In Houston, to become a lawyer, basically, you need a 4-year undergraduate degree of any kind, doesn't matter what kind it is. And then you go to law, you take the LSAT, the examination to try to get into law school. And then on you go to law school. It's a 3-year course. There are 3 law schools in Houston. There's the University of Houston, where I went. There's South Texas College of Law in downtown, and then the Thurgood Marshall School of Law at TSU. So we've got a lot of lawyers in the city. Whether that's good or bad, who knows? We like to make fun of lawyers, but it's you know, it's good to have them when you need them. In the same way that I need some help on a lot of different issues as well. So I've got a presentation today about, and I hope I can do this correctly. Take me just a second. And boom. Can we see that?
Yep,
there we
good.
Go. All right. And let me make sure I can, there we go. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is the Texas court system. And I think Myra made a good point about sort of relaxing and being calm, and we're all going to deal with troubles and problems, and chief among them, if we ever get in there, is the court system. It can be confusing, it can be complex, it's very scary, and I hope that what I'm talking about today can kind of at least give you the big picture of it. Before we get into the courts themselves, let's talk about what is the law, okay? And this is sort of a very simplified version of it, but it's pretty much applies to almost any area of the law. What we're talking about is rights. Each of us has certain rights, and each of us has certain obligations. And it can be any number of things. A right is something that we are entitled to do or that we're entitled to receive. An obligation, on the other hand, is something we're required to do or not allowed to do. And let's just use an example here. If we were in person, I would be walking around the room and we would be calling on people, but I won't subject you to that today. But let's say that someone hired me, don't know why they would, I'm not a good painter, but somebody said, help me paint my house or my apartment, paint these rooms. And I say, okay, I'll do it for $350. Deal. That's our deal. I have an obligation, first of all, to actually do the work. We've agreed, we have a contract. In this case, it's a verbal contract. I have an obligation to do the work. I have an obligation to do the work correctly, to do it reasonably well. I don't have to be perfect, but I have to do a good job. That's my obligation. I have a right, if I do a good job, to get paid. And the flip side of that is that you, as the homeowner or the apartment renter, whoever it is that's hiring me to paint, you have a right to receive a good paint job, right colors, done on time, you know, all of those sorts of things. I don't damage stuff while I'm there, but you have an obligation to pay me if I finish and do an okay job. Another example would be if we get on the highway today. I'm sitting here, I'm downtown, I'm looking at I-45 out of my window right now. We're downtown. I'm part of, as mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of a law firm that provides legal services to clients. Our name is DLA Piper, and I'm in the Houston office. It's a global law firm with offices sort of everywhere. And all of us are part of a group of lawyers called the Houston Bar Association or the State Bar of Texas. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But in our offices, I'm looking out at I-45 right now. And if you, I see people driving down the road, they've never met each other. They don't know each other, and yet they have rights and obligations between them. One of them has the right to drive down the road, to stay in their lane, to not be restricted on where they can go. The other one, though, and both of them have both rights and obligations, they have an obligation not to drink and drive and don't violate the law. They have an obligation to go the right speed. They have an obligation to be safe, right? So if for some reason somebody is texting and they crash into the other person, well, they now have violated their obligation, and that other person potentially has a right to claim any injuries they suffered or damages to their property in terms of the car. So there's all of these rights and obligations back and forth. So what do lawyers do? Lawyers do two things, and it sounds like you've got a lot of groups that have talked through this organization about planning ahead, and that's a good thing. We all, at some point, until science changes, we're all going to leave this earth at some point. So a lot of people do things proactively legally by drafting wills to say, what happens? I want to plan ahead and think, where is my money, my property, my assets, my whatever it is that I have going to go if I was to pass away? Well, that is getting ahead of the curve and thinking, how do I protect what I have? I'm going to draft a will. That's planning ahead legally. The same thing, writing contracts. In my example of painting the house, a lawyer might say, let's make it more than just a house. Let's make it an office building. And it's a business that's painting it, and it's a big deal, and there are hundreds of thousands of dollars involved. They're probably going to be written contracts, and lawyers can draft those contracts with the clients to figure out what kind of money are we going to get paid? What is the standard of care for the quality of the work? What happens if it rains? What's the schedule? All of those sort of what if scenarios, you're planning them out ahead of time. And there are some other examples here, helping people figure out immigration issues ahead of time, helping organize businesses, those sorts of things. So lawyers can do that. We also, in the law, though, we deal with problems after they have developed. And that's my particular role. A lot of lawyers do different things. My particular role is what's called litigation. So it's the handling of disputes, and hence we're about to talk about the court system. That can be dealing with criminal charges that are made against a person, civil lawsuits. We're going to talk about that difference in a minute, and that's what I do. Family law, all of these issues. A lot of disputes get resolved. I don't know the percentages, but I handle civil court lawsuits, and it's probably 80% of them, if not more, settle for money, settle for some other resolution, charges might be dropped. But those that do go forward, that's where they end up in the courthouse. So here we are in downtown Houston, and on the left is the criminal courthouse, and on the right is the civil courthouse. They're kind of right next to each other. And within them are the certain state courts. So let's talk about the types of courts first, by category. And we'll talk about what's called jurisdiction in a moment. That's a separate issue. Most courts, now in small towns in Texas, you go to some small county and most of these issues might be contained within the same court. In big cities like Houston, Harris County, big counties, they're typically divided. So we have a court system for family law issues, as an example. There are family courts here downtown for Harris County, Texas. And I don't know the number of courts offhand, but they handle divorces, they handle child custody, they handle child support issues or non-payment issues. All of those things are handled in the family courts. Next is a probate court. There are probate courts downtown here. When individuals pass away, whether they do or don't have a will, there is a process to handle the pass down or the distribution of assets, so that title changes and your property moves on to the next person in your estate, in your family, or whoever you've chosen to give it to. Those matters are handled through probate court, including, by the way, disagreements you can have of the heirs. If your father passes away, you can have disagreements potentially by the sisters and brothers and et cetera in those probate courts. Criminal court is what we see on TV, obviously, and I'm going to talk in a minute about the difference between that and civil court. Civil court, again, we'll talk more detail in a moment, is usually disputes between two parties and usually seeking money, but not always. And then there are tax courts. If you invent something, there can be a patent court, patent bodies that hear disputes over, did you invent it or did you not, those sorts of things. So there's a lot of types of categories of court. There's also, within each category, there can be different jurisdictions. So first of all, and also happens to be downtown, I can see it from my window, there's federal courts. So not every issue that happens in our lives, a day-to-day auto accident, a day-to-day, well, hopefully not day-to-day, but violent behavior, murders, and those horrible kinds of things typically are state court issues and not federal crimes, whereas federal may involve drug offenses, federal may involve disputes between people of different states, so that there's an interstate issue. State and county courts, on the other hand, are a different system. So you could have a civil dispute that could end up potentially in either one of those courts, state or county courts, district courts, or federal courts. There's also municipal courts. So if many of the speeding laws or many of the, I would say, smaller, I hate to use that word, but misdemeanor crimes often are based on city of Houston laws or whatever jurisdiction, and those are municipal courts. Justice courts, and we've heard this through the years, small claims court or justice of the peace court. They used to have TV shows about it. You see Judge Judy, and I saw another one where there's a couple that I think are married, and it's some kind of small claims type of court on TV now, or night court way back in the old days, the TV show. That is for smaller disputes. Now, inflation takes charge. When I first started practicing law, that cap was $5,000. Now it's up to $20,000. So technically smaller disputes, and we'll talk more in a few minutes about that. Landlord-tenant disputes are usually in those courts, and those are called forcible entry and detainer. I have no idea why that word was created many, many years ago, but that's the name of the kind of eviction proceedings that we have. And that's where they're handled. And then also small criminal matters as well. And if you've ever been down there, it's typically in those courts, you don't, in none of these courts do you have to have a lawyer to represent you, but it's much more common in justice courts to do it on your own. We'll talk about the process in a minute, because it's a nerve-wracking process, but you can figure it out. I think it's a lot more common in justice courts. And then there are agencies different agencies that may, again, tax issues may have things like that where there may be hearings and considerations, disputes there. Before I move any further, I know that there were a couple of names that were mentioned earlier about groups that can help. And there's just a couple here that if any of you, I would invite you to write these down and look at them. TexasBar.com. That is the State Bar of Texas. That is, when you are a lawyer in the state of Texas, you have to be licensed by the state of Texas, and then you become a member of the Texas Bar. By the way, I don't quite know why the word bar is the word. I think it is because when you are in a courtroom, you walk from the audience to the bar. across the bar into the courtroom area, I think. I could be wrong about that. But in any event, it's the State Bar of Texas, and they have some guides about small claims, about traffic court, and those things that can help you sort of prepare for that. The Houston Bar Association, again, a group of lawyers, thousands of them, I believe, in the city of Houston, hba.org. And so that also has links to various organizations that can provide legal assistance. I've listed one here for pro bono. Pro bono means legal services provided for free. And lawyers all throughout the state, throughout the city, we certainly do it, many others do. It's a great way to try to help people in the community when they qualify for assistance. And one of them happens to be the Houston Volunteer Lawyers Group, makejusticehappen.org. There are other groups. I know Lone Star Legal Aid was mentioned earlier. That's another one, and there are others like it. So do not be afraid of trying to find resources to help you if you get involved and need assistance in the courts. Okay, the typical process is this. So the person, because here's the reality, each of us in our lives could very well be on either side of this, right? We have been probably, maybe whether we've actually been named in a lawsuit or brought a lawsuit, the reality is we could certainly be accused of something, or we could feel like our rights were harmed by someone else who didn't meet their obligations. So the first thing that happens really in any of these courts, whether it's federal, state, municipal, justice courts, whatever, the plaintiff files a petition. Now in criminal court, this is kind of the same concept, except the plaintiff really at that point is the government. It's the state of Texas against you, or the city of Houston against you for violating a traffic law or whatever it may be. But this is kind of the words used in civil cases, and we will talk more about that in a moment, the differences. The plaintiff, that's the person that is bringing the action. They file what's called a petition. These things can be hundreds of pages for multi-million dollar lawsuits with a lot of detail. They can be literally one page and handwritten in justice courts. And so most justice courts, if you have a dispute, if in my scenario I was charging somebody $700 to paint and they didn't pay me, I would probably, if I didn't get paid, my option would be go down to any court, but probably to a justice court and file a lawsuit, file a petition. But that's not the end of the case, okay? You still have to serve the defendant. Our process in the US gives the other party a chance to present their case, to make sure they got notice of it, to make sure they have a chance to defend themselves. And so there is a process where the constable will help serve, quote, serve the defendant with the paperwork and what's called the citation. And it's at that point then that there is a deadline that defendant has to answer the case. Absolutely essential that the defendant do so. And it's 20 days in one court. I think it's 10 days in justice court after you've been served, but the paperwork will say it. Why? If you don't answer, a judgment will be entered against you. There is something called a default judgment. Now, all of this process that we're talking about right here, it is nothing but accusations, and that's it. This does not win the case, assuming the defendant answers and appears. The allegations that a plaintiff makes is not necessarily the truth. It is just a statement that is being alleged. Our country is built on the principle, and most countries are, that you are innocent until proven guilty, that you have a right to present your own defense. And there is nothing in the law, with a couple of narrow exceptions, where there's any standard. Well, there's a standard that you have to meet, a good faith standard. But there's no board, there's no body, there's no individual that says, hey, let me look at this petition and see if it has any truth to it. Before you file a lawsuit, you must come to me and clear it and make sure it's good. That does not exist. So lawsuits can be filed, criminal charges too, but certainly civil lawsuits that literally have no basis in fact whatsoever. They are bogus. or they only tell half the story. That's always possible too. And so all of this process of filing the lawsuit, getting it served, the defendant answering is not yet the conclusion of the case. The two other steps that follow, there's discovery. In justice court, there's not as much discovery, usually none. In bigger cases, we exchange documents. We take depositions of people under oath where it's question and answer in front of a court reporter and under oath where they have to tell the truth. That process goes on for a while, and then ultimately they reach trial. Trial is where the person making the decision ultimately has to decide the facts, decide what the law is, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it's very important to remember that these early processes here, all they do is set the stage for a later trial. I think people get frustrated. I'm going to sue, and by next week, I'm going to have my decision, and they'll see. They're going to pay me. Well, it's a long process, unfortunately, because we are in a big city and there are a lot of cases that are filed. Okay. Deep breath for a moment. This, I think, is very important to understand, and I think that the movies and TV really largely talk about the criminal side of it. Criminal cases are typically, we pass these laws as a society. We say, okay, you can't drink and drive. You can't be intoxicated while you drive, driving while intoxicated. You can't murder somebody. You can't steal something. You can't drive 100 miles an hour. We're going to set some speed limit that we as a society, through our lawmakers, believe is safe. Whatever those criminal obligations are, going back to rights and obligations. So it is the government, through our elected officials, that create laws that are trying to create some law for the general protection, for the general good of society, at least in theory. If there is a violation of that obligation, then the government, acting through prosecutors, you'll hear about Harris County prosecutors, the federal government has prosecutors, state of Texas, whoever it is, will be bringing charges against an individual for allegedly violating that law. And the penalties sought can be a number of things. It can be jail time, it can be fines, it can be probation, those sorts of things. An important distinction you'll hear, the burden of proof in a criminal court is beyond a reasonable doubt. So, you always see the famous kind of, what are those things called? The scales of justice, right? Or I think about it in football terms, the 50-yard line, in a football term, you're taking the ball from your own 20-yard line, and boy, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, you might not have to score a touchdown, but you've got to get really, really far down the line. And in the scales of justice, it's really beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't mean absolutely, you didn't see somebody do the act necessarily where it's on film and there's not one bit of doubt, but it's awful close to that. And I know we're not doing questions now, but I want you to think about, and we can talk later during question and answer if you'd like, why is it that there's this high burden in criminal court? When you flip it over here in civil court, it's only a preponderance of the evidence. In my football example, I take the ball at the 20-yard line and I go across the 50 to the other person's side of the field, and it's not a lot further than that. It's just sort of a little bit more than not, more likely than not, preponderance of the evidence. So think to yourself why that is. Think of the penalties that are involved. You can go to jail if you get convicted of a crime, potentially, or if it's a particularly heinous crime, we have the death penalty in this state. But whatever it is, you're taking away someone's liberty potentially, as opposed to civil cases, which in money matters, and money is, like it or not, we all have got to make it. We've got to live, we've got to buy things to survive. But most civil cases are about money. So the private parties are suing each other in a civil case. It is person X versus person Y, driving the car, this person drove the car and hit them. Well, they think that they're owed money from the person driving the car. It's two people against each other. The state of Texas, Harris County, the government doesn't really care who wins. It's just two people against each other involved in a one-off transaction or incident, not a society-changing issue necessarily. And so at the end of the day, it's one person versus another. The burden of proof, the party making the claim only has to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence, this lesser, easier to meet standard. And the government is typically not a party to it. And well, I'll tell you what, let's go to the example and then we'll ask this. Now, I know we're not going to do Q&A, right, questions and answers right now, but think of this beautiful Porsche that somebody bought. You've got it at your house. What types of disputes, civil or criminal, might there be with this amazingly expensive, nice sports car? So let's think about that. Well, number one, it could be stolen, right? I could walk up to this driveway, see this beautiful car, and I could somehow figure out how to try to steal it, and I could steal it. I could then be accused of a crime and potentially have criminal charges brought against me. Or I could be mad at you. I could know who owns this, and I'm not happy with them because they did something horrible in my life, and I take a baseball bat and I hit this person's car, beat it up, break the windshield, put dents in it, do all these horrible things. I could face criminal charges for destruction of property, for theft of property, whatever it might be. But what else? Civil. That person that owns the property, let's pretend that you're the one that owns this Porsche. Are you happy if I go to jail because I stole your car or because I hit it with a baseball bat and I got caught and I went to jail? Yeah, you're kind of happy, right? Because justice is done. You feel good. It feels good that I'm being punished for my bad behavior. And yet, here you sit with this amazingly expensive car that's been stolen and damaged, or it's been beaten up with a baseball bat. Me going to jail doesn't solve the second problem, which is you're out of money. You've got to get it fixed. You've got to get it replaced. You've got to get, maybe this car is something that you use for work. Maybe you can't work without it. I don't know. But the money part of it, there could be civil cases at that same time as there are criminal cases trying to get money in association with what happened here. Same thing, driving down the road. If the driver of this vehicle has been drinking at a bar or at home and goes out and hurts somebody, they could be prosecuted in criminal court at the same time that there are civil lawsuits by the alleged injured victims suing them for money for that accident. And it goes on and on. You can think of a million types of examples that both of them could be at play. And there are many famous examples. I'll give you, going back to the football analogy, I'll give you an example here. There was a really sad case about 5 or 10 years ago, something like that. Heat of Texas. I want to say it was in Central Texas. And a young man died in football practice. He overheated and had some really terrible tragedy. The coach was about to be charged, but ultimately was not, I believe, charged with criminal activity, criminal negligence for failing to, give him enough water and rest and those sorts of things. And so ultimately they didn't bring those charges, but he did get sued in civil lawsuits as well, as did other coaches. And so you might successfully avoid a criminal charge, but still have a civil charge. And so that happens all the time. So you really need to kind of focus and keep your eye on the ball. By the way, non-payment of debt. So if I performed my painting work for you and you didn't pay me, that's a civil lawsuit. That's not a crime. It is a crime if you knew you didn't have the money and you intentionally defrauded me. And there are some criminal statutes about intentionally hot checks or bad checks, theft of services if you know you can't afford, that sort of thing. But that's a little bit different. Okay. Who is it that decides disputes? So in general, a judge, whether it's a justice court judge or whether it's a state district court judge or a federal judge, they typically decide the law. Okay. And what that means is there are certain elements of proof that I have to prove. Let's say you're the owner of that Porsche, and let's just say I take it, right? For me to be prosecuted for a crime, we could go look up the law right now, and it would say there are 4 or 5 elements to prove theft. That someone else owned it and had the right to possession to it, that I took it without their consent, that I refused to return it upon demand, and that I kept it, without consent, something like that. I don't know the exact elements of proof, but that's how it's decided. And that's what the fact finder, a jury, we'll talk about in a second, ultimately decides. So the judge says, all right, this is the law. These are the things you have to prove. The judge decides, are there any facts to support those elements? He or she's not going to decide those facts, but they're just going to make sure there's at least a fact that can get to trial that a jury can consider. And then the judge is what's called the gatekeeper, making sure that only the right evidence comes in to prove that case. A jury, where there's a jury trial, decides the facts. So they consider the evidence. We'll talk more about evidence in a moment. They decide who they believe and who they don't believe. They decide whether a party has met those elements of proof. And they often have to rely upon their belief as to the credibility, the honesty, the believability of a witness, which is hard to do. And when you have situations where 2 people, when there's no video, when there's no direct document, there's no photograph proving something, there's no smoking gun, as the phrase is, it can be very hard to make those kinds of decisions, but that's what they have to do. Now, this last point, there are lots of cases where the judge does both, and that's called a bench trial. And so if you go to justice court, each person has the choice to either decide to have a jury or not. And there are some advantages and disadvantages of both. If you decide to let the judge be the ultimate fact finder, the one and only decision maker, well, you will live with his or her decision, as opposed to having a group of people in civil cases. In state court, for example, it's 12 jurors. You have to have 10 on your side. So that's a bench trial where the judge decides both. Okay. What is a jury? I don't know if some of y'all have served on juries or not, but basically it's a group of people from the community selected at large according to the law, who swear to make a decision not based on bias or anything else, but to make a decision based on the evidence. But what it really means, if you back down from it, it's really a chance that any of us, we don't have to be rich, we don't have to be poor, we don't have to be any particular ethnicity, religion, age, gender, anything. It doesn't matter. Everybody has a voice. And that's not always been the case, as unfortunately we know in this country and in other countries too. There have been times when people were prohibited because of stereotypes from serving on juries, and that's no longer the case. But it certainly has been in the past. But now everybody has a voice. Let's say there's a lawsuit against a car maker for some alleged defect. That one lawsuit, if you say, well, the steering wheel doesn't work and somebody had a horrific accident because of it, that automaker is subject to the decision of the jury if that case goes to trial. And that one voice of a jury, one case, can really truly make a difference either direction in making those decisions. And there have been a lot of landmark decisions that have started with a jury trial. A jury is a fundamental right. Trial by jury is guaranteed by the constitutions, Texas and US. And, the idea is that we, as a society, at least in theory, trust a community of our peers more than just one person. Again, you don't have to have a jury, but that is the sort of fundamental underpinning of it. A lot of countries don't have that. You can see this person on the right somewhere over in England or something like that, wearing a wig. I believe I've had a case over there. Yep, I do not know the history of the wigs, but they do actually in trials wear wigs over there, and they rarely use juries. So it's just a different approach. Now, juries, if you are involved, I often get involved in some complex kind of engineering issues for like refineries or something like that, where there's some really complex piece of equipment involved. And I'm not an engineer. I study up on it. I learn as best I can. The jurors aren't going to be engineers necessarily. They're not. And so it's a different system where over there, a judge might think that he or she has more knowledge or more study or more understanding of these complex issues, whereas a jury might not. But that's the job of the system, is to have regular people of all different types of careers and education and wealth or lack of wealth and all these backgrounds to bring that to the table. And that's the belief that juries get it ultimately. I will tell you, I've tried a lot of cases in my career, and there are some great judges, obviously, in all of the courts here. I think jury trials are bar none. They're scary because it's hard to predict what 12 people are going to think of your case. And they're not telling you as you go along. If you have a 4-week trial or a 2-day trial or whatever, you're trying to guess in your head, oh my God, are they going my way or not? I can't tell. And that's just the way it is. But they ultimately, most jurors really do, even though they hate missing work for it or hate missing being at home or caring for their kids or whatever the issue is, most juries take that very, very seriously. So it's actually a very good system when it works well. Okay, evidence at trial. So we've filed our lawsuit. Remember, filing doesn't mean anything. Anybody can accuse anybody else of anything, anytime. And by the way, I didn't come back to that. The exceptions, I'm not sure I mentioned them. They are rare, but occasionally the law has certain types of claims that have to be backed up by a report. For example, a medical malpractice claim in Texas, that's just one example. You have to have a medical report that gets filed by an expert that gets filed with the petition. Okay. Other than that, and even then, that just gets you in the door of court. That's not the ultimate trial. So ultimately, you have to have some kind of evidence that you can use to prove your case, or if you've been sued, that you can use to protect yourself. The first kind is documents. Maybe there's a contract written and signed by both parties, which says what the rights and the obligations are. Maybe there are letters back and forth that are kind of formal. What's interesting is a lot of people don't think about, but it absolutely is evidence, and it absolutely does come in. Emails and texts. We say things in emails that we would never say in a letter. We say things in texts that we would never say in emails. It's just a much more informal way. There are cuss words sometimes. There are derogatory descriptions of somebody that you don't like that's on the other side. And all of these things come out, and a jury can be looking at it. So I would caution, if you're dealing with something where you feel like this is not headed the right direction and this is headed towards a dispute, be thoughtful about what you write down. Be respectful, be professional, be aggressive if you need to be, but be thoughtful about how that might look later, because those come in. Photographs and videos, of course, we're in an era now where everybody's got a cell phone, it seems like, and everybody's a photographer or a videographer. So those come out of the woodwork now a lot more than they used to. Physical evidence, of course. In my case, the beaten up Porsche, maybe that could be evidence. Witness testimony. Witness testimony, and you will have this in justice court a lot. When you swear under oath, they make you, do you swear to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth? Yes, I do. That testimony you then give, and you're under obligation under the law not to lie. Now, it's hard to prove when people lie. That is evidence. And so think about it. If you were in a justice court claim, think about, how do I make myself more credible? I tell the truth. I remember as much detail as I can. Hopefully I've got some documents maybe to back it up. I need to back up my story with that evidence. But it's even more than that if you think about it. How did I dress today? Did I wear shorts? Did I wear some shirt that I've worn for 7 days in a row, or should I, or do I need to clean up a little bit? Do I stand up when I speak to the judge? Do I just sit down, slouched back in my chair? All of those things. Nowadays, I'll just say it. A lot of people have tattoos and things like that. Fine, that's all good. Be thoughtful about, should I wear a long sleeve shirt to cover those up? I don't know. It's everybody's individual decision. But think about the way you present yourself and the story you tell. You absolutely have to tell the truth, and the way that you tell it in terms of respect and professionalism can really help sway people. I really do believe that jurors can sort of smell a rat, if you will, that they can see testimony and they think this is just this just doesn't pass the smell test. So be thinking, if you were to go to justice court, for example, or anything else, about treating it with the sort of respect and seriousness that it deserves. I've been in criminal. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I don't go to criminal court, but I have helped people in criminal court, friends or things like that, or pro bono work. And I've seen people go into criminal court and act like it was a joke. And the judge came down really, really hard on them because they weren't treating it with seriousness. The judges in the courtrooms deserve respect. And given the importance of what you're presenting, that certainly is something that you ought to consider. Okay, so we talked earlier about how the judge is kind of the gatekeeper. Remember that? There are some things that people want to get into evidence that doesn't always come in, and that's a big part of the trial fight. Justice courts, especially where the judge is the one deciding the facts and deciding what comes into evidence and all that, they sort of hear everything, and then they can, in their head, break out what is not relevant versus what is relevant. But let's talk about some things that don't come in. So witness testimony that is not firsthand, and that's rumor or that's hearsay. You may have heard that word, hearsay. So if I was to in my example where I keep going back to this one, sorry, but I took somebody's Porsche and I was mad at him, and I allegedly took a bat and broke the windshield because I was so mad. Well, you can't bring in Linda, whoever Linda is, to say, well, gosh, Linda, what have you heard? Well, I heard John tell me that Mark hit this Porsche. Well, that's not evidence. That's hearsay. That's nothing more than rumor. And so we need witness testimony that is based on firsthand personal knowledge. I saw it done. I was there when I did it myself. I saw it done. I directly heard Mark admit it, as opposed to some second or third hand kind of thing. That's out. That's there. Evidence that is not relevant. So, can I sit there for 2 hours and, in my defense, talk about how I like Ford trucks and how I work at the church on Sundays and how I, whatever. A little bit of background's one thing, but at some point the judge is going to say, move on. That is not relevant. Let's focus on the core issues. What about past allegations of wrongdoing? It's kind of an interesting area, right? In theory, when we're in court, we're deciding specific allegations here on this specific incident. So should prior alleged bad acts come into evidence? That can be an important issue, particularly in criminal court. Going back to my example where I allegedly hit the Porsche with a bat, would it matter if I had stolen $20 of beer 6 years ago? I don't know. Would it matter if I had been accused of stealing beer 6 years ago, $20 worth, but was never convicted? Okay, think that through. Are we a society that judges people based on rumor and allegation? But okay, what if I had stolen beer? Sorry, dumb example, but it is what it is. What if I had stolen it 6 years ago? Is that really relevant to whether I took a baseball bat to somebody's Porsche? I don't know. You'd have to study the law and see if there are cases where that did or didn't come into evidence. You'd have to argue to the judge about why it does or doesn't come in. What about if I had been charged criminally and convicted 10 times in the last year for using a baseball bat on mailboxes, front doors, and other cars? Right? All of a sudden now we're tying it closer and closer to the case. And so those sorts of issues, behavior in the past is a very tough area in our society because we're trying to make decisions based on what someone did or didn't do this time. And yet we're trying to prove it from past behavior. Or alternatively, the jurors don't hear that. They think there's no proof that I took my baseball bat to a Porsche, and lo and behold, they find out after they declare me not guilty that I've done it 15 times in the last year. So there's that. The reverse can be true as well. And the same thing is true about character evidence. Sometimes that can come in a criminal court, but not always. Is it good enough to say, well, he's a good guy or he's a bad guy, or I've heard through the grapevine that he's a jerk, or all of these things, that he's really honest or he's not honest. Those are challenges that we face. And then ultimately courts have the power to make decisions that evidence, even when it may be relevant, can still be substantially outweighed by these other concerns, bias or prejudice or those sorts of things. Like if you let into evidence that I had hit other people's cars 10 times, that might be relevant, but it also might be so prejudicial. The moment you as a juror hear that, I'm done. You can pretty much guarantee you're going to find me guilty again. And so the court has some power to sort of say, okay, it might be relevant, but that's just too much. And other examples, if there are really, if there are crime scene photos that are particularly just horrible, some might be let into evidence, but not too many, just because it's so prejudicial to see how horrific some of those scenes are, whatever it may be. So that's kind of an important issue that the judge does. Let me go back briefly and then we'll do questions and answers. I want to talk about this one more time in terms of the types of courts. Just be thoughtful when you have an issue or when you're facing an issue that there are so many categories of areas that you may have to deal with. The family court system, again, is one. The family court system is very emotional. The judges are very experienced in family court issues. Family court issues can be very challenging without a lawyer, candidly, if they're hotly contested. If things, you can have no fault divorces in Texas, and if those are not really that contested, those you may or may not want to have a lawyer. Probate, same kind of thing. A lot of that is paperwork unless people oppose it, or unless there's a lot of debt that the individual owed. Those sorts of issues. Criminal, you can imagine the seriousness of the charges there and just how dangerous it can be when you get very, very serious allegations made against you, to not take it seriously. And then civil, again, you've got the justice courts where it is perfectly normal to pursue your rights or what you believe your rights to be in civil court in front of those courts. All of these courts, and including, by the way, the federal system as well, all of these courts have an appeal process. Okay, you try your case. Here we are. Where'd it go? Boom. We've now tried our case over here, and you've lost. Is that the end of the road for you? Not necessarily. All of the state systems, the state systems have courts of appeal, and then ultimately there are two highest courts in the state of Texas. There are the courts of appeal that hear both criminal appeals and civil appeals. And then in civil cases, the Texas Supreme Court, or in criminal cases, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And what they're trying to do, those courts are not deciding the credibility of witnesses or the weight of the evidence. Gosh, you know, a jury might say, I liked Mark. I believed him, so I ruled for him. Or, he looked like a liar to me, and this document was bad, and I saw a video that looked like him doing this bad thing, so I ruled against him. These appellate courts are not going to do that. They're going to decide, was there evidence admitted that shouldn't have been admitted? Was the law correctly stated by the judge? Was there enough evidence for the jury to at least consider both sides of the issue? Or was there an absence of evidence completely? That's the process of appeal. The federal court system has that as well. So you go up to the United States Circuit Court of Appeals. We in Texas are part of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. There are, I forget how many, but I think 11, if I'm not mistaken. There may be a couple more, but they're all around the nation. And then ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court. Interestingly, and we could probably sit here and debate this all day, state court judges, at least in the state of Texas, are elected. And so they have to run for office. You will see anytime we're coming up in November this year, there will be elections, federal elections. It's not a presidential year, but there will be Congress elections and things like that. There will be judges in Harris County on the ballot, from the justice court level to the county courts at law, state district courts, criminal courts, family courts, all of those. And there's a lot of judges that a lot of people don't know, but they are elected. And like any elected official, they have to get their name out there. They have to have candidacies and what have you. Federal judges are appointed for life. And there may be some exceptions to that, but it's certainly the federal district courts, the U.S. Supreme Court right now. You may be aware because of the retirement of one of the justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, the top court in the land, that there is another individual who the president nominates and the Senate, U.S. Senate, votes on. And so there's an individual that is put up right now and has been nominated and is being voted on as to whether she will make it to the U.S. Supreme Court. So, those processes are different between the state and federal. And I suppose you could probably take both sides of the issue. On the one hand, is a lifetime appointment good? Well, at least they don't have the political pressure of having to make a decision and still run for election next week. On the other hand, do they lose touch with their community? I don't know. That's one issue. And the reverse is true as well. If you're checking in with your neighbors and being a part of the community through elections, are you more in touch with your neighbors, or are you subject to people being concerned that you're making decisions based on elections? So there's that. Anyway, I think I'm happy to take questions and answers now. I think it's about, looks like it's been about an hour, a little less. I will end it by saying, and then we'll do questions and answers. The system is flawed. Any system where you're trying to make a decision without absolute proof one way or the other has to be flawed, because there is absolutely no perfect guarantee that somebody committed a crime or didn't commit a crime, or that somebody violated a contract, like my painting contract that I used that example earlier, or that the kids should go with the mom or the dad. There's rarely a case that makes it that far that it's absolutely crystal clear. And so while it's in some sense always going to have a flaw in it, the key is that people tell the truth. Each side presents the best case they can with the actual evidence. When needed, they get assistance, whether that's through backing up here groups like this that provides, and others that provide guides for how to represent yourself or how to get representation in the court system. But it's basically to really truly bring the true evidence together and to tell the truth, not to try to make things up, not try to spin stories. And hopefully the truth, whatever it may be, ultimately prevails and justice is done. But there is no perfect system, and maybe there never will be. But I think that our court system has been tested through the years. The jury system has been tested through the years. Having a court of appeals above a jury system is helpful to try to catch errors that were made. But again, it's still imperfect. And then I guess the last thing I'll say, there are alternatives to the court system. Private parties often will sign contracts that provide for what's called arbitration. You may have heard of it in baseball context. Baseball players get to go to arbitration if they don't think they've been paid enough. Sometimes we sign agreements with cell phone providers or with our employers that say if we have a dispute, we'll go to arbitration. Arbitration, just like courts, is a way to solve disputes and two conflicting claims between two parties, but it's not part of the public system. That's private parties that pay an arbitrator to be, or a group of arbitrators to make decisions. So I think that is it, and I'm happy to take any questions. Let me stop sharing. Okay, the floor is open.
Okay, there was one question here in the chat that says regarding the painting job, and is a verbal agreement sufficient to define the obligation and right for contractor and client?
Excellent question. See, I wish we were in person. I'd be flying around the room so excited right now. Yes, comma, except in some cases. So Texas has, and most states have, some things that have to be in writing. I believe, I'd have to study it. And we have, one of the things you'll see in a law library is a bunch of books. It's not that we as lawyers remember every law or what the rule is in every time. We know where to find it. And that's an easy to find answer. Yes, the reality is a verbal contract, in most cases, setting aside the sale of real estate, and I'm sure some other exceptions, is enforceable. Now, why should we think about putting it in writing? Because how are we going to prove it? When I go to court, okay, Nia, you're in front of my face right now, so I'm going to use you as an example. You hired me, and how much did you agree to pay me for my paint job? How much?
Little to nothing.
Little to nothing. $150, she says, okay? And I say, well, no, Nia, I finished this, look at this glorious paint job. You said you would pay me not $150. You forgot that extra zero. You said you were going to pay me $1,500.
Nah,
what do we have?
Nah,
we have a dispute, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
I now have to sue her and go to justice court or some other court, and I have to prove a verbal contract, 100% enforceable, except now it's me against her. And she looks very nice, and I like to think I'm nice, but I'm thinking, uh-oh, the jury's going to like her. How am I going to prove that? If I had just had a written contract, a half a page, I will paint your house for $1,500. I'll be done next week, whatever. And she signed it or something. That's not really a real thick contract, but it sure is helpful in proving my case later. But yes, a verbal contract can be enforceable. It's just harder to prove if there's a dispute. So what you're trying to do is think in your head the same way you would with a will. If I pass away, I don't want my kids fighting about my, whatever, my guitar. So I'm going to decide now who gets it. And then that way there's no fighting. I'm trying to predict ahead of time. Same thing here. I'm trying to predict an agreement that prevents people from disputing something as simple as, how much I'm getting paid for a paint job.
On that question itself, when my husband and I were building our house, each contractor that he had to do, like for tile, for painting, he had me draw up a contract and say, for this project, we are expecting this, and this is how much we're going to pay you. And through the end of the process of building our house, one contractor tried to go in and say, well, that's not what I agreed. Well, my husband came in and said, and I kept asking him, why do we have, this is just so much work. And he said, document it, and I was always there, or we had someone else always there when they were signing the contract. He says, no, because you know what, through this process, we're going through so much and we don't remember what we're agreeing to all the time, but I want to make sure it's in writing. So thanks. I guess my husband was right and I was wrong.
No, he is. And but yeah, it's Murphy's Law, right? If you do a verbal deal, and I've done this, and I've been cheated by a friend of my wife's from high school, and I got cheated. We had a home thing and got cheated, and boo on us. Never hire a friend or family, right? So they say. Trust but verify. It's Murphy's Law. If we had signed a contract that was more clear, and we paid some up front, we paid more up front than we should have, and they stole it basically, and we've never gotten it back and never will. If I had been more thoughtful and said, why am I paying that much up front? Shouldn't I just pay you enough to get the materials? And I had been just taking a little more time, I never would have had that problem. So Murphy's Law is, yeah, it's a hassle, but it's the one time you don't do it, that's going to come back.
That's the problem. Exactly. Now, if for those folks, because some people will still do verbal contract or verbal agreements or what have you, is it recommended that they, if there is no written, that you still follow up like with the text, hey, based on our conversation, you agreed to do X, Y, Z. Thank you very much. Something just to kind of follow up to, start some kind of a trail that acknowledges this is what we agreed to.
100%. Yeah. If you're not going to do a contract ahead of time, the more people want to see 2 years from now, if you're having a fight about this, and it's going to be, Nia says this and Mark says that, wouldn't it be nice if one of us had a text from the time, a contemporaneous at the time document, or an email, or just a note to yourself, your little file of, you take a picture or two along the way and you keep that note in your file, or a $1,500 will be done by date, boom. That's some evidence. It's not perfect. They didn't sign it, but it's sure a lot better than nothing. So absolutely. I think just treating it like a business transaction. If there's money in, if you're doing things out of the goodness of your heart, if you're walking down to your friend and helping them cut a tree down or whatever, okay, fine. But if it's a business deal and you're paying money and you expect to get a product that is a good product, there ought to be some kind of basic documentation, just so both parties are clear, to avoid fights.
When Myra just asked the question about when she was saying about building her house, and I know with our nonprofit that we require our contractors to have release of liens. Do you recommend, or how is it that the average person would get like a release of lien from a vendor or someone that they actually have them to do work for them?
Yeah, I think I would. So a lien, is basically a way a contractor in your house can get paid. So if you don't pay them, they have at least the chance theoretically to put a cloud on your title, right, in the real property records, and to try to go to court and ultimately get a judgment and force the sale of your house. I mean, that's way down the line, but it can happen. And so you want a release of lien. Yeah, I think the best you could do is ahead of time, kind of read up on home construction or whatever. Make sure you've thought through it. Talk to the contractor ahead of time. Hey, how are we going to do this payment ahead of time? What paperwork am I going to get? Are you going to give me these releases of lien? What are we going to do here? And try to define that ahead of time so that it's not sitting out there. And I think the term lien and all those things that go with it, probably like a million things y'all talk about through this organization, can be very confusing. Tax law, I don't know tax law, but I can read up on it. I can figure out on the internet, okay, I got some basic idea, lien stuff, home construction projects, do a little bit of reading and try to figure it out ahead of time, and then just have an open, honest conversation with whoever you're working with on the other side to try to nail it down.
Yeah, I had a
sorry. Go ahead.
I had a contractor that I was recently talking to just from working at the organization that was looking to get some work done. And I asked them, do you have your sub to file release of liens? Would they be willing to do that? I've never heard of that before, and I've never had to do it. I'm like, and you're never the person that's gonna get my business. You're telling me that you have never done that before, and you're a contractor, and you want me to work directly with your subs, not with you, but with them,
Right.
and pay them directly. No, my contract is with you. Why am I talking to your subs? They have nothing to do with the agreement that you and I talked
Mhm.
about. So nah, that's quite all right. Never mind. Thank you very much.
And you know,
And I quickly walked away from that.
and talking about when we were building our house, thank God that my husband did have the contracts, because when you get a mortgage, if you're building your house, you have to have a release of lien to close up the process. So if you want a mortgage and you're building a house and you're trying to go through that process, thanks Nia, because yeah, you have to have all the contractors fill out a release of lien, and then you have to file it. And thank God, I mean, we got educated through the process. And of course, Nia, you know, we contacted Nia.
But you raise a good point, though. Most of us, I certainly don't. Most people in this community, probably 0.5% of the people or something, owe money on their house and will for a long, long time. And so, yeah, if it's a house project, for example, you probably do want to coordinate with your mortgage company and make sure you understand what you're going to need to get it done, to make sure there's not some problem. It's a good point.
I have another question about probate court.
Mhm.
Why is it, or you may or may not have an answer for this, that in Texas that people cannot represent themselves in probate court, especially as costly as it is to hire an attorney? Why is it that you actually have to have an attorney to go to probate court?
So you have stumped me. I'm not a probate lawyer. I don't know that that's true. If that is true, that's news to me, because in most courts you do have the right to represent yourself. I thought you did in probate court, to be honest with you. I don't know that you necessarily want to, because it's a weird area. There's lots of weird little forms that have to be filed. I say weird. Some probate judge is going to be watching this and mad at me. It's very specific and complex, I should say. If that is the case, I'm surprised. But there are just areas where it's probably best to have somebody that knows what they're doing do it. I've had, through these pro bono groups, that's one area I've appeared as helping people in probate court. I just told you I'm not a probate lawyer, but we can figure it out for the basics, and I've done that. And so some of these groups can help with that.
Yeah, from our previous workshops, that's what they've mentioned, that it's very rare instances where you are allowed to go and represent yourself in probate court. Otherwise, you have to have an attorney to do it.
Okay. Maybe it's strongly, I don't know. I think it may just be strongly encouraged to get somebody to help as opposed to required, but I'm not sure.
Before I say required, we'll verify that before I put that information out there. When Myra and Nia told me that I had to have one, I couldn't do it by myself. I don't want to get that out there. So
yeah, and I'm not sure either direction, since that's not my area. Yeah.
Let us verify that.
Hey, Neil, we want to remind everyone, this is for informational purposes only. This is not legal advice. So
I would
remember,
say, the emotion that's the other thing. I mean, when I've got a truck, if I have to get it fixed, I'm emotional about it, because I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't know how much it's going to cost. I used to be able to work on a truck when I was in high school with not today's modern vehicles. So I'm freaked out by it. I'm freaked out about when's it going to be fixed? How expensive is it going to be? People that aren't used to the court system, it's the same way. It can be very emotional, particularly in family courts, particularly in probate courts, particularly, any court, I suppose. And so kind of backing up and understanding the process from beginning to end can really help you sort of say, okay, I'm going to calm down. I'm going to read up a little bit on it, to try to do a little research here. I'm going to go to the courts, have some materials, the state bar, the Houston bar. I'm going to try to get some information here and just take a deep breath and get through this. Really understanding the forest for the trees, the big picture before you worry about all the little stuff can help you, because you'll really stress yourself out if you let yourself over the course of, a justice court case can take 6 to 9 months or something. State district court can take a few years. It just depends on the size of the case and the dockets. And the dockets were backed up because of COVID. There were a lot of cases that got delayed because of COVID. So now there's a big backup. So it can be a while before you get to court.
And you know,
Are you,
that's why we created the month of service, because a lot of times when we're going through these court issues, priorities, concerns, stresses in your life, you know, you want to, just like you said, okay, calm down. We want to be able to give you the information just so you'll know what the process is. We're not giving you legal advice. We're just kind of giving you that information. So at least when you're going through that process, you're not stressing out and you can think through the process
Somewhat, yeah.
somewhat. Yeah.
And keep in mind, courts they are not allowed to help either party. So you may go appear in, okay, maybe probate, but let's take probate out of it. You could go appear in justice court and you say, Judge, what do I need to file next? And the judge will say, you know, I'm just the judge. You need to read and it freaks people out because they're like, well, hold on now. I'm really confused and scared. What's about to happen to me? The judge is not allowed to sort of quote assist one party over another. The judge is a neutral person. And so kind of getting the rhythm of the road down a little bit before you go. The courts themselves have various forms that you can find, and so that can be very helpful. But you're probably not going to be aided standing there in the courtroom. He's not or she's not going to say, "Oh, well, present this. Give me that document." Well, here's a better argument. You know.
and that's where the county law library comes in handy. We had that presentation a couple of weeks back about all of the available resources that are at the law library. And it was just so much amazing information that people would have access to and had no clue, had absolutely no clue. So that is definitely a very good resource. And for those that are interested that did not get the opportunity, I will include that link for the law library in with this link for this session, for you to go back to view again if you want to get that information, because there was a lot of great stuff that they presented there as well. One thing I wanted to ask too, what's the one thing that you recommend, I'm not going to say advise, that when somebody finds themselves in a situation where they're going to have to go to court or what have you, they don't have the funds necessarily, but then they still can't qualify for one of those legal service organizations, where do they start? Like,
that's a great question, because it's I think the biggest challenge in our system. It's not the people who can afford lawyers, and in a weird way, it's not always the people who can't, because hopefully there's some group, if they work hard enough and figure it out, that can help them on a pro bono basis. It's sometimes the people that don't qualify for that, and they're kind of stuck in the middle. You know, first of all, friends and family. If somebody knows, I would do the research yourself on the online and that kind of thing. If it's a justice court issue, again, you can represent yourself in justice court if you just think through, okay, what am I trying to prove? What documents, what evidence do I have to prove to become your own lawyer? You know, I don't know what to say beyond that, except just you can represent yourself. You certainly can find people to do it for free, friends and family, or through these pro bono groups. But it is challenging. I would also say, I suppose, if you found a lawyer to help you. I mentioned there are 3 law schools in the city of Houston. There are all kinds of different rates for people to help. So if you can find a lawyer and they say, well, I'm going to charge you, $800 an hour. Okay, well, that's one thing. Or I'm going to charge you $100 an hour. Or I'm going to do a flat fee for a divorce of $5,000 or $1,000. Really, there's no embarrassment, shame, or whatever in trying to get that nailed down immediately, because at the end of the day, if you need a lawyer and legal assistance, there's going to be someone out there for a price that makes sense, that's reasonable and appropriate, and they're going to be plenty good to help you out. So I wish I had a better answer than that, because that's one of those things. Same thing. If I need a mechanic to work on my car and I can't afford the one down the street, what do I do? It's kind of that weird situation where you're trying to do the best you can. But I'd say get your fee arrangement in place as best you can, and hopefully they will work with you.
And get it in writing.
And get it in writing. No, I had some friends who needed a criminal law lawyer a couple of years ago, and and again, I don't do criminal law. I went around and it had the potential. It was actually on the news. It had the potential to be something that could have been expensive. And I set them up through calling people and figure out, okay, give me some options of who are the really well-known criminal lawyers, who are the ones who, are a little bit more reasonable, and who are the ones that you would trust that maybe is brand new lawyer or young or whatever and doesn't charge as much, and give me some options, kind of a menu, and I was shocked at the difference in what people would charge. I mean, one person wanted to charge six figures, one person, $50,000 or something, someone else, something way more reasonable. And this was a pretty serious issue. So it was important that they get, but we were able to find someone through that was a lot more reasonable, but it's tough. It's tough.
I have another question. And I'm not trying to hog or monopolize. So if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to either raise your hand, unmute yourself, or put your question in the chat. But it's just kind of things are popping into my head as we go along. I have jury duty tomorrow afternoon at 5:30, and it's a virtual. Are more courts, do you find that more courts are going towards the virtual platform to try to help people from having to go downtown, or are they eventually going to go back to strictly doing things in person?
Yeah, I think it's all going to be in person for the most part. I have tried 2 virtual trials during COVID, but they were bench trials where the judge was deciding. So the judge, she was able to get on the, online. Jury trials, from what I've read, have not been successful. That's just what I've read. I haven't had one virtual, but I've heard that they're not that successful virtually. It's just somehow the system doesn't work as well with 12 people and making sure everybody's paying attention, making sure everybody's equipment works and all that. My guess is what you're doing is just sort of a check-in, and then you'll have to come down to court, is my assumption. I know that they are starting to, they're starting to do in-person jury trials again. They have been doing them for a while, but they were doing them socially distanced. They were doing it at the NRG Center rather than the Jury Assembly Center, which is downtown next to the courthouses. Jury Assembly Center has been reopened now, so it's getting back to normal.
Okay, all right. I think that's pretty much all the questions that I have. So
anybody else, feel free to ask me, y'all.
Yeah, you have an attorney right here live and in person that you can ask anything that you want. So that's not that often that you have this kind of a professional right here at your fingertips or at your speaker tips, so to speak. So
Mr.
Yes,
Mark, one thing that I love about you is that when you're explaining something, it's detailed, but it's so easy to understand. And that's so important. And when we want to thank you, because a lot of times, a lot of our community, they have the thought and they have the question, and then they ask the question to a legal or an attorney, and then that attorney makes it so impossible to understand. It makes it seem like, hey, Nia, did he say or she say this, or did they say, she said, she'll tell me, oh, I don't know, I thought he said that, and that's, especially when you're going through a stressor, you're trying to figure out and calm down and figure out the process. We really want to thank you because you made the process more understandable. If that sounds correct to you.
I appreciate that, because that's kind of my job. What we do in disputes is, you're presenting one side of the case. Every trial, I'm famous for saying, all the people I work with say, yeah, you'll say anything is simple. I come into some case and I'm like, this is a pretty easy case. And I don't have a, first clue about it, but you sort of break it down, if it's like my refinery example, do I know what a flow valve is? Not really, but I can figure it out pretty quickly, and somebody can show me. And then I can say, well, folks, a flow valve is just something that opens or closes and it lets liquid through. Oh, okay. So everything, the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone, and it's all, at the end of the day, it all kind of becomes simple. But what is hard, and this goes back to that emotional part, is every one of us that is in something with uncertainty, and courtrooms are a perfect example. I can tell you every day of the week, ooh, I don't think the jury's buying that witness. I think we're doing good. I think we're really killing it. Do I really know? Absolutely not. And it's the most stressful kind of thing when you're in a courtroom with a jury trial. There's a bell that'll ring or a buzzer that'll ring, and they have a verdict and your heart's just going, and that's a civil case. It just involves money for your clients. I cannot imagine being on trial for something where I could go to jail and they could come out my way or the other way. Hold on, I think
Why-
that's my question.
Why is it that the courts use that old English semi-biblical language, like hence and thereof and about to and whatever? Or I mean, if you ever tried looking at or just reading like a legal document, and by the time you get through with the whole thing, you have no idea what you've read.
Exactly.
So why is it so difficult to just, okay, attorneys, y'all can have this version. Everybody else, this is your version. How
Because
is it
I'm
that
gonna-
we? Uh-oh.
So here's an old book, Black's Law Dictionary, and I could probably find it heretofore in here, I bet. Yeah. I won't even read it to you. It's so silly because it's always been done that way. And slowly but surely we're learning, I think, that that's stupid, and all judges have preferences. Most judges just want simplicity. And there are a couple of judges in federal court, especially if you write with that kind of stuff, they'll laugh you, well, they'll yell you out of court. So you have to be very simplicity, understanding issues is the key. And a lot of us get caught up in that sort of Latin garbage because it's always been done that way.
Yeah, I think it'll make it a lot easier for people to have to go to court and like represent themselves, or
I agree.
I
agree.
otherwise it's just ridiculous. But
All right, I
You know
see a
what?
question here. Let me, can y'all see that on the, I'm
No,
not going to read the name, but can
unless
you
they
see
send
the
it to you directly, no.
Am I allowed to read that out? Well, I'm not going to read the
Absolutely.
person's name. Okay. If you signed a contract when you got hired to a company, and then 1 month down the line, HR, human resources, and the manager came to you and said that they are paying you more than the position you were hired for, does the employee have a right to refuse the suggested pay cut? Great question. So employment law, that whole issue of rights and obligations. Employee has rights and obligations. Employer that hires you has rights and obligations. And every state's different. Texas, the general rule is that we are an at-will state, meaning you can be hired or fired for any reason. The fact that I'm here today, I could walk in tomorrow and be gone, with some exceptions. One, if you have a contract for a term of employment, that's different. Most people don't. Two, you can't be fired on the basis of race, religion, age, gender, sexual orientation, you get the anti-discrimination laws. Other than that, and you can't be fired if you report, if you suffer a workplace injury and they retaliate against you, things like that. So there are some exceptions, but beyond that, you're sort of an at-will day-to-day employee. And so if one day the employer is saying, I'm going to pay you, $1,000 a month or whatever, $10,000 a month or whatever the number is, and then they come back and say, I'm going to redo your deal, I'm going to pay you, that minus 20%. You're kind of in a position, unless you already had some kind of contract, where you're now having to say, well, it's a new day. This is a new deal. I'm either going to take it or I'm going to walk out the door or start looking for a new job. In the same way that they can fire you one day, assuming it's not a violation of those anti-discrimination laws. The only maybe exception to that, if they committed fraud to get you to go there, I'll pay you $10,000 a month if you give up all these rights from this other company and come with me, and then they sort of cheat you out of that the next day, and they never intended to pay you what they promised to pay you. That might be a fraud claim, but that's really hard to prove. So yeah, employment law in Texas is surprisingly unprotected.
The an offer letter is not the same as a contract, though, correct? Like if someone,
Yeah, an offer letter only means unless it says, here's my offer, I will pay you, $10,000 a month for a 1-year term. That is, and you say, I accept, that can be a contract. If the
Okay.
offer letter is, congratulations, you're hired on an at-will basis. And frankly, even if it didn't say an at-will basis, you're hired for $10,000 a year at that salary, or 100,000, whatever the math is. They could then fire you 5 days later and say, nope, we're done. I owe you that amount pro rata for that period of time you were with me, and then we're done. So employment is it's scary. We think we have a lot more rights as employees than we maybe do. And interestingly, I think a lot of employers in today's society are probably a little more timid about firing people than technically the law might demand. I mean, if somebody doesn't perform well, most companies have the right to say, well, I can hire you and fire you for any reason, as long as it's, not one of those violating deals. But a lot of companies will still give you a chance to fix your performance and still give you a long period, and it's for fear of getting sued, I think. There's another question, direct message, not going to read the name. Can an ex-spouse whose name is no longer on a deed after a divorce at a later date fight you if his or her name is still on the mortgage? So answer should be no. So if this is where it gets a little quirky, you and your spouse buy a house together, it's community property. Texas generally, you get part of the debts and the assets. Unfortunately, it's not always wonderful. So let's say it's a $200,000 house or something. In a divorce proceeding, the judge says through the divorce decree, maybe you agreed to it or maybe the court found it, but there's a divorce decree, and it says you, the wife, let's just say that example, you get the house, congratulations, and the husband gets whatever else. So that decree is what controls. The fact that the person's name might not have been corrected yet on the deed is meaningless. The judgment of the family court controls. And so that spouse can't come back and say, well, I still have a right to it because my name's in the deed. Now, the flip side is, though, the bank that loaned the money, unless you get a new loan only in your name, and all of that, can actually come against both of you, because you were as between them that loaned the money to the two of you, both of you are still on the hook. So interesting.
So let me verify to make sure I heard you correctly. So if a divorce decree says that one person gets the house, and regardless if the other person's name is still on the actual deed but not the mortgage, then the decree trumps the deed.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to that nice caveat of I'm not giving legal advice, because I'm not, but yes, in almost all situations that would be the case. The judgment ultimately is saying, same thing for cars and things like that. I hereby declare, as the family judge with jurisdiction over this divorce proceeding, that you get that asset, regardless of what name it might currently be in. Now, usually there's a process then to fix it and get everything in the right name. Why? Because when you want to go sell that car 3 years from now, you don't want to have to call up ex-wife or ex-husband, hey, come sign this sales document with me. And same thing, you probably want to get the loan in your own name. If you're the now ex-spouse and there's still a mortgage on that house, you don't really want your credit rising or falling on your ex-spouse's remembering ability and actual payment and ability to pay. So usually those things get corrected after the divorce. But yeah, as a general rule, the divorce decree is saying assets go this way and this way. Now go fix it and get them in those names.
Cool things.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, you
What
guys,
else?
I know
We still
you
have
have
a
a
little
lot of
time.
great questions. So does anyone else have a question that you'd like to ask personally or add to the chat or on social media? Nia, are there any questions on social media?
Let me check there.
Yeah,
Kinda
feel free. You don't
monitor-
have to do it by chat if you don't want. You're welcome. Your decision, but you can unmute and ask a question just out loud if you'd like.
Okay, I don't see one on here. No. Okay.
This was great,
All right. It was.
but you need to come back again because now Nia and I are going to have a lot of questions when we finish this with
When we
each
think about,
other.
oh yeah, we forgot. I wonder if blah blah. Yeah, then we should have asked that question too. And I'm glad you brought up employment law or employment discrimination, because next Tuesday it just so happened that we're having our employment discrimination workshop next week, next Tuesday at 1 p.m. So for those that have questions about employment laws and employment discrimination, then you definitely want to come back and join us next Tuesday for that. So.
Especially
wanted
since
to-
we went through COVID, or we're still going through COVID. A lot of people have a lot of questions and concerns. So that's going to be a good presentation for you all to see.
I would recommend, I'm not an employment lawyer, and whoever is doing it must be, and that's great. that's an area of the law that is counterintuitive more than you would think. You would think that, I think I have a lot of family members and friends who say, well, I'm getting, somebody's not treating me right at work. It's the law as a general rule,
Mhm.
the anti-discrimination statutes are absolutely essential and critical. But I'd strongly recommend people listening to that, because it's the general employment rules in most states, Texas included, are a lot tougher than you would think. And these anti-discrimination laws are very important to understand, so you have a sense of them. I mean, the goal obviously is, and you hope all employers do it, but they just don't, is that there's a fair, equal, equitable, respectful environment. And yet society always changes what that means. And so, what people did a long time ago would probably be the most disgusting violation in the world right now. And it's important to understand your rights. And my guess is many people who might watch this are on both sides. They may work for a business where they are sort of the quote employer or manager of other people, and in turn they are also an employee being managed by others too. So it cuts both ways.
That's a great or an interesting point. I was listening to a program actually just this morning, and someone was mentioning or saying something that laws are changing, but there are people that are still have been prosecuted that are in jail from laws that have now changed. So what happens to those people that have been arrested, incarcerated, what have you, for a crime that is now no longer a crime?
That is it. So, criminal law would be a blast to do if I had the guts to do it. I don't, but I think that's I've heard that on a podcast recently, and I'm trying to remember the example. I don't know if it was the DNA technology that came, or if it was a rogue prosecutor that had bad test results. It may have been that as well. And also when the law retroactively changes that what used to be a crime is no longer a crime. I don't know the answer to all of it. But I think to the extent that it can have applicability to convictions in the past, it absolutely raises a chance that someone can get out now saying that's no longer a crime. If you didn't plea bargain. I have had a situation where we had a client or a prospective client came, and they had, I don't know if it was a tax issue or some payment to a federal regulator about some issue that turned out years later, to not actually have the alleged violation that they settled and released, turned out no longer to have been a violation of the new regulations. But at that point they had settled and released it, and they couldn't get their money back. They had paid money to the government to resolve an issue. But I think had they been convicted of something, that would have been much different. So it's a very, very interesting issue as laws change over time or technology changes. And I'll tell you a perfect example of one that's going to come down the pike, I'm convinced, because we see it in state after state after state, marijuana. At some point, technically speaking, the people who may choose to do that don't like to hear this, but technically speaking, the use of marijuana, whether in a state that allows it medically or a state that doesn't allow, or that allows it fully, I think there are some states like that, it's still technically a violation of federal law. And so whether the federal government chooses to enforce it or not is a different beast. If you go to Colorado, you do something that might be legal under Colorado law, you technically speaking, for now at least, are violating federal law. And so as I understand it, Congress right now is considering maybe legalizing marijuana. Or again, I'm not an expert in that at all in terms of what they're doing, but if that changes, it will be interesting to see people who may have been convicted. Will they be released? Will there be, I don't know. I don't know. So I think it's just changing morals over time. I mean, my God, we were in a country that at one point you couldn't drink or sell alcohol. And here we are watching the Super Bowl with Bud Light commercials. Right?
But what, you brought up a good question, is when you're going through a criminal situation, would you settle or would you go ahead and fight? I mean, that's a if you agree to the conviction and you say, yeah, I agree, then, no, you weren't convicted. You just agreed to whatever the judge or the district attorney decided, correct? So,
Mhm, yeah. So yeah, think of a criminal conviction. Think if you're accused of, some horrible assault and you didn't do it, and in your heart of hearts you didn't do it. And if the jury comes back, you're going to get 50 years or 40 years. Well, my God, I'm 52 years old. I'm almost 53. I'll be dead in 50 years. Or they come back to me and say, Mark, you can get 5 years hard time. Oh my God, but I didn't do it. I don't know. I don't know. Because boy, when that buzzer rings and the jury comes back, and you could be convicted because the jury didn't like me because I said something stupid in a text. Oh, I'm mad at that person because they did X, Y, Z, and I'm going to go get them. Yeah, I hope they die or whatever. I said something stupid in a text and it somehow comes out. Well, that doesn't mean I did it, but my God, a jury's going to hear that and think, uh-oh, or somebody looked like me in the neighborhood, whatever. There's a million different reasons. That's why most civil cases settle out. So if I'm seeking $1 million for a car wreck that someone allegedly had with me or breached a contract or something, would I settle it for, and let's say I'm suing you and you say, well, my God, I didn't do it. I wouldn't, I was perfect. You're the one that wrecked me, or the light was red, light was green, whatever. And I said, all right, well, tell you what, pay me $25,000. Well, that's highway robbery. I didn't do it. And then you're thinking, oh my God, though, I could be done with it. I'm gonna have to pay a lawyer $12,000 anyway, and then I might lose $1 million. Ugh, it's a very hard decision to have the guts to try a case and put your hands in the fate of a judge or jury. And I hope for all of us, we don't have to make that decision. But the reality is someone among us, at least in a civil court, is going to have to make that decision at some point.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Okay, someone just said, this was great. Will it be saved? Where can we visit? Really great info. Well, for those of you that didn't hear in the beginning, this session is being recorded and it is being broadcast live on our social media platforms. So you can find the recording or the live sessions on our Facebook page at Amos Houston TX, but we will also be emailing a link of this recording for you to go back to revisit, to share, to watch again. And we encourage people to please share the link, share it with people that may also find this information to be beneficial as well too. So, and in addition,
remind them that link will only stay viable for a month.
Correct.
After that, so if you're trying to share it with someone that needs that information, make sure you share it and tell them to open it up now. Because if you wait after a month, it's not going to be there. But it will be in the Amos Houston Facebook page.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful, because I missed the beginning. Okay, yep, we'll definitely send it out to you. I want to also include those resources that you put on that page for everyone, as well as the information to our other legal service partners, so that if, again, you guys find yourselves in need of any civil legal assistance, then you can reach out to those partners and to those resources as well. So Mark, thank you very, very, very much. Absolutely. For all the wonderful information that you provided here today. And like Myra said, we certainly invite you to come back and provide this information to again. It was great. It was a lot of information.
So would love to do it. Thank you for letting me do it.
All right. Thank you to all of our participants, you guys, for continuing to come back and to support our month of service collaboration. We really appreciate it. We ask you to just take a couple of minutes following this presentation to answer a couple of survey questions that we may have. The presentations that we provide for you guys every month are based on the feedback that we get from people. So we do welcome and encourage your feedback to let us know what it is that you'd like to hear, what is it that you need, what information or services that they're real pertinent or are more important to you guys that you'd like more information about. So, so again, please let us know how we're doing, so on and so forth. So Myra, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, we want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know, just like me, we all work, we have children at home, or we're doing something. So always know you're not alone, even though whatever goes through in your life, that's what the month of service is all about. At least with some of the stuff, you know, of course, we can't feed you, so, but, no, we're here for you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, later this week, in addition to next Tuesdays, I just want to tell you about tomorrow. We have our understanding credit, how it works and how improving your score affects you. That's tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. and that's going to be presented by Family Houston, as well as Thursday, our legal advanced planning and why you need it, and kind of dispelling the myths as to why it is that people don't need wills or estate plans. So definitely want to join us for that on Thursday at 1 p.m. So thank you, Ms. Grace. We appreciate you coming. All right. Again, thank you guys very much for participating today. You all have a wonderful remainder of your afternoon and continue to take care of yourselves and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.